From Bowling Green State University and the Institute for the Study of Culture and Society, this is BG Ideas.
I'm going to show you this with a wonderful experiment.
You're listening to the Big Ideas Podcast, a collaboration between the Institute for the Study of Culture and Society and the School of Media and Communication at Bowling Green State University. I'm Jolie Sheffer, Professor of English and American Culture Studies and the Director of ICS. As always, the opinions expressed on this podcast are those of the individuals involved and do not necessarily represent those of BGSU or its employees. Bowling Green State University and its campuses are situated in the Great Black Swamp and the Lower Great Lakes region. This land is the homeland of the Wyandot, Kickapoo, Miami, Potawatomi, Ottawa, and multiple other indigenous tribal nations present and past who were forcibly removed to and from the area. We recognize these historical and contemporary ties in our efforts toward decolonizing history, and we thank the Indigenous individuals and communities who've been living and working on this land from time immemorial. Joining me today are Dr. Nathan Hensley and Dr. Margaret Weinberger. Today we're talking about their recent team-taught course, which was supported by the ICS Team Teaching Program. The goal of the Team Teaching Program is to encourage interdisciplinary innovation in curriculum and pedagogy. Dr. Nathan Hensley is an Associate Professor of Sustainability Education at BGSU. His research interests include understanding the intersections between curriculum theory, place-based education, and sustainability studies. Dr. Margaret Weinberger is a teaching professor and director of the undergraduate program in BGSU's sociology department. She teaches courses in cultural anthropology, sociological theory, and race, ethnicity, and inequality. Today, we'll be talking about how their course combines storytelling and sociology to create new approaches to environmental sustainability in education. Thank you, Margaret and Nathan, for joining me today. I'd love it if you could start by telling us just sort of about the course. Tell us more about the topic and what were the goals that you had in taking this team teaching approach. Nathan, could you start us off?
Absolutely. Yeah, so this was a project that Dr. Weinberger and I started thinking about almost 2 years ago. And it was on one of our hikes with our cohort that we call the Black Swamp community of faculty members. And this group started actually about 4 years ago with a grant project that came out of the National Endowment for the Humanities. And the Black Swamp project that we started with 4 years ago, this grant that we did, it allowed me and Dr. Shalou and Ian Young to come together and get faculty together to think about how to incorporate place and sustainability within a humanities framework across all disciplines. This particular course was able to come out of that project, and when we were doing a hike at a nearby Black Swamp remnant, and there was maybe about 7 or 8 of the Black Swamp community group that was doing this. We actually saw this call for proposals to team teach, and at that time, Dr. Weinberger was also interested. So it was great. We were running parallel paths for a little bit because both of us we reached out to other people in our group and said, hey, would you be interested in the possibility of actually putting a proposal out and team teaching together? And then eventually, Dr. Weinberger and I realized that we both were doing this coming from the same sort of perspective. And it was fantastic, though, because, Dr. Weinberger was able to bring in the sociological perspective of the ecological and sustainability viewpoints. And then I was talking about the environmental humanities.
This is hilarious to me. Like, we each have different stories about this course on stories. And so my story is so I'm not really in the humanities. I'm in the social sciences, but more through friendship connections. I was included in the humanities grant to be part of the original sustainability faculty, and that was the 4 years ago project. And then Nathan was gone on to, where were you, Nathan?
It was Taiwan.
Taiwan.
Yeah.
So Nathan was gone, and then the following year had that in the summer, and in the fall, I organized my BGSU 1910 course around the Great Black Swamp, and incorporated 7 of the faculty who were part of that sustainability group. Then the call came out, and I saw the call for grant proposals, and I actually I emailed the other 7 faculty who I had already worked with. That's who I was thinking of, like, doing this with. And then Nathan came, and none of them were available. And then Nathan came back, and I was like, oh yeah, Nathan. And so it was really an adventure, because we had not worked together before, because he was out of the country, so he wasn't part of that other team teaching experience. So this was new territory, and yeah, and really exciting for lots of different reasons.
Yeah, can I add another thing? Dr. Shalou, Amilcar Shalou, and I were able to also team teach a course together about 2.5 years ago. And so this kind of predated this team teaching course that Dr. Weinberger and I did. And that course was called Sustainability Histories, was what we called that one. And it focused on historical perspectives and the environmental humanities within sustainability. And that was a fantastic teaching opportunity with Amilcar. However, that one was also in the midst of the pandemic semester. So I was still very interested in carrying the process forward, and reached out to the group. And actually I started off with a couple of folks within our group to see if they were very interested in this. And then those folks were not available. And then I was very thankful that, Maggie was able to step up, and she also was pursuing the same thing around the same time.
Yeah, so I'd like to get into a little bit of each of your paths into the team teaching and this more interdisciplinary approach to pedagogy and curriculum. As you've mentioned, Nathan, you've got a history of thinking, especially with the humanities, collaboratively. You've mentioned Amilcar Shalou, faculty member in history, Ian Young in philosophy. And so this was a kind of natural evolution out of that. For you, what role does team teaching specifically play in thinking about revising our approach to sustainability education?
Yeah, well, there's so many dimensions that are inherently part of sustainability. And I have a history in terms of teaching from a team viewpoint. When I did my postdoc prior to this job here at Bowling Green at Auburn University, I was able to team teach in a sustainability undergraduate program for honor students. And that's where I guess you could say I really got my feet wet in this, and recognized the importance of bringing in multiple perspectives, because sustainability, has a tie-in to virtually every discipline. And when we're teaching students, I find that it's so helpful to bring in the multiple forms of inquiry that is an inherent part of team teaching. And then even the whole idea of the pedagogy of debate, where 2 faculty members can show what their specific perspective is from their disciplinary lens within a discussion. And so that's one thing that we did a lot in this course, which is called Reimagining Sustainability. Dr. Weinberger and I implemented, on occasion, not every class, we did discussions that were led by the students, but both Dr. Weinberger and I would frame those, and we would do a few minutes, sort of maybe a mini lecture ahead of time, either in class or through a video lecture, and then we would have the students lead their own discussion. And then the dialogue that occurred there, we would both step in near the end of the student-led discussion, Dr. Weinberger and I, and we would talk about how our disciplines tie into the reading that we had assigned for that week, and also offer our own perspectives. I think the other thing too is in terms of team teaching, drawing within the field of the environmental humanities, is that we draw heavily from the sciences. It's not only a humanities perspective, there's that whole idea of transdisciplinarity, which means, going beyond and spanning disciplines. So it's even another step above interdisciplinarity. And the whole idea with transdisciplinarity is that by kind of going above and beyond the disciplines that maybe a specific instructor has, is that there's a new viewpoint that's created and, I guess, constructed by the group interaction.
So, Margaret, I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about, coming from your perspective, how new was team teaching for you, and what excited you about this opportunity and for this class in particular?
So I've been around BGSU for a very long time, and I started out full-time. I was teaching part-time while I was ABD. My background, my PhD is in American Culture Studies, which is multidisciplinary, with a focus in popular culture and sociology. And so I already had an interdisciplinary mindset. And then my first full-time position at BGSU was with the Chapman community. When we were in Chapman-Harshman, we were actually over in that residence hall. And it was just so exciting to have my office in the residence hall with, an artist next door and an English professor across the hall. And, there we all were. And I had the opportunity to team teach in Chapman across disciplines. And then we would brainstorm what we wanted to do. So this is in 1999. So, this has been a long time coming at BGSU. We talked about then, like, wouldn't it be so cool to have general education course in water, let's say, and then and have a student get a semester's worth of credit, but as we address this issue from all these different disciplinary perspectives. It was a creative time, and there wasn't at that point a mechanism for incorporating that sort of thing. I think we're still struggling with that, right? Like, what's the institutional structure? I'm waxing sociological here, but what's the institutional structure for team teaching? We don't have it built in. So I've long been interested. I think it's invigorating to work with colleagues across disciplines and get introduced to a different way of thinking as I'm, sharing my perspective on things. And with sustainability, it is everything. So it is the science, but the social science of it. I feel like that's a really important piece, because not everybody experiences environmental degradation in the same way, and so issues of social class and race and ethnicity are really, really important. So this was I was thrilled to be able to participate in this and bring that voice into this discussion.
I'd love to hear you each give some examples of the ways you tried to bring in those different perspectives. Nathan, you've already mentioned the sort of debate approach, but could you talk more maybe about the place-based focus of this class and the ways you tried to demonstrate for the students the importance of different disciplinary perspectives on the larger questions of sustainability? And I'll let either of you go first.
Nathan, you want to start?
Yes, I do. Yeah, because I really am a scholar of our bioregion, our local surrounding ecological and social community, and the work that I've been doing ever since my doctoral program in curriculum theory. The work that I have been focusing on is, our local landscape and how that can influence our curriculum. And I guess specifically for this course, I think we really focus a lot on water, even more than we thought we would from the very beginning. And I think part of that is recognizing the idea of being part of the Great Black Swamp historical region here in northwestern Ohio, and also being part of the Western Lake Erie Basin and all the environmental impacts that we as dwellers within the Western Lake Erie Basin, the impacts that we're having on the water quality around us. And so I guess in terms of some examples of place in our class, we very early on in the class, when it was icy and snowy, because the course was held in the spring semester of 2022, our first field trip was out to the Black Swamp Preserve, and it was wonderful. We were able to get a naturalist from the Wood County Parks that came out and talked about the history, the natural and cultural history of this particular region. And we did this specific trip right after a short discussion that we had in class. So we combined a short lecture in class, a student-led discussion, and then we went out into the field. And then we really did focus too on sensory awareness and nature immersion and ecological literacy when we think about place. And the idea is, what can we learn through our direct experiences in these places, and how does that speak to the reading and the lecture and the overall course format. And so when we think about place, people are able to really connect to the ground, that the place, the landscape that they're familiar with, and especially when they develop a passion or an affinity to do it through direct interaction.
So the whatever we were doing, then my sets of readings were sort of asking students to take a step back and look at the structure then, and come to recognize. So we talked about how green space is often white space, and how people of color are often excluded from green spaces, and so they had readings about the amount of access, the readings about the establishment of national parks, and how Native people were displaced in order to create these spaces that really were for originally, white people with resources who had access to leisure time. It was interesting to read student journals because there were students in the class who resonated with that in a big way and said, yeah, when I was growing up, it was a big deal if I got to go to a park. And then other students who had grown up going skiing, and so there was a lot of a wide range of experience. And so there was a really, we had a very nice structure, a really good structure that was readings and experiential, and then following it up with discussion, and sometimes online discussion, and then individual journaling. So we also got what came out in discussion, but then also some more intimate, sharing in the journaling that students did.
We're going to take a quick break. Thanks for listening to the Big Ideas podcast.
Question. Answer. Discussion.
If you are passionate about big ideas, consider sponsoring this program. To have your name or organization mentioned here, please contact us at ics@bgsu.edu.
Hello, welcome back to the Big Ideas podcast. Today I'm talking with Dr. Margaret Weinberger and Dr. Nathan Hensley on how sociology and storytelling can create new ways of teaching sustainability and environmentalism to students. Margaret, you, as we've talked about, you began planning this class quite some time ago, right? It's been sort of a long lead up time to this course. Could you tell us more about some of the things that maybe surprised you about the actual experience between what you had planned and what you expected, and some of the unanticipated conversations or experiences?
I was quite surprised actually at how engaged the students were. I thought we had an engaging course. I think I was surprised though by how vigorously they engaged in the class discussions, the student-led discussion. And students, they seemed to cover a lot of territory. We would add things at the end that we felt like were important points to bring out, but most of the time I felt like the discussion was really robust. Were you surprised by anything, Nathan?
Yeah, well, I was surprised with how smooth things went, considering that we were still in the thick of COVID. So we had the KN95 masks that the university provided when we were more specifically with the van transportation component to each field trip, and students were very, very good about listening to what the requirements were that Maggie and I set up. We said, hey, for everyone's well-being, we're going to require masks, these KN95 masks in the van, and people did it, and they even did so I would say some of them did it joyfully, and so that was one thing. I was also surprised by, I would say, how receptive the local community members were and experts when we asked them to either become guest speakers or to do a field trip. Because we had, at the very end, our culminating field trip that we had planned was a canoe trip on the Maumee River. And we were very excited about that. And maybe even I might have been the most excited because I was pretty psyched about that. But we had an issue that was, I didn't think about the water temperature. So we had it was way too cold. It was unsafe to go on. So we ended up kind of calling an audible at the line of scrimmage, I guess you would say. And we got in touch with Bob Midden and with H2 Ohio. And of course, for the listeners, he's a professor emeritus at BGSU and very active in several aspects of, well, I would say citizen science is, one of his big areas. And so he was able to take our group. We only, gave him maybe a 3 or 4 day notice, and we're like, hey, we're looking to fill this spot, and we would love for the students to hear about your project. And he was very hospitable and had us go out to the spot. He gave us the coordinates on GPS, and it was a little bit difficult to find, but we got to it. And I think those sort of adventures that were unexpected. We also had to move one of our maybe 1 or 2 of our field trips because of COVID related reasons. So I think the spontaneity of that also helped us to role model to our students how to think on our feet. And I think that was one thing that we as a team were able to roll with.
Another related to this, another piece of my story with the class is that Bob Midden is somebody that I taught with at Chapman. And so he was part of my early interdisciplinary work. And Bob has been doing soil testing with students, for decades. When we were in Chapman, he was doing taking students. They were soil testing around areas that used to have oil wells and testing the soil. But that was an amazing experience. The students all took soil samples and they actually contributed to the work that was being done at that research site. And I think they felt good about that. You could tell that they were excited about doing, extracting the soil sample. And that was nice for me coming kind of full circle. That felt really good. And I think also the hands-on, and Bob is so good at doing really hands-on experiential scientific, his courses are always engage students in a really wonderful way. So that was cool. The TMACOG was a really exceptional program too.
For our listeners, TMACOG stands for the Toledo Metro Area Council of Governments.
And they put together just an amazing panel of people to talk about like the engineering of this spot, the landscaping with native species, the social implications for the immediate neighborhood. I mean, there were like 5 or 6 presenters. They really did. That was surprising to me, just what an extensive amount presentation that they put together for us and the number of people involved. That was really, and then we still had time to drive out to the spot. And I'm forgetting what it's called.
Oh, the biocell.
Biocell,
yes.
That's right, to a biocell. Yeah.
I want to take us back a little bit to the conversation about kind of your plans for the course and then what you've learned and, what you'll take with you. What were some of the key skills that you went in wanting the students to develop?
Fantastic question. I would say a big part of it was understanding sustainability from a holistic perspective instead of, only one viewpoint. And that, again, is something that the team teaching was a vehicle that allowed us to enable students to see sustainability from many viewpoints. And, part of that, too, was thinking about the, sustainability principles and practices. And then another big part for me, goal was for students to be able to interact within our community, both within BG and beyond, and be able to see sustainability in practice. And by doing that, students will be able to talk about sustainability in a way that is more, they can connect more to their audience. And related to that, I think another big picture goal for me was for students to think about how to tell the stories of their specific disciplines. And if they're able to tell these stories in a way that's reimagined, and that's sort of a big theme we had is, reimagining sustainability, but also reimagining science, reimagining, video technology, all of these different components in ways that is that students are able to communicate it. And then I also sense of place is another big goal. So a goal of mine was that, and at Maggie's as well, was to think about place in the context of their own discipline and to learn about what's available right here. A number of students may say it's very boring in Northwestern Ohio, and even faculty members, but we found a lot of surprises on this course. And I think that really is a way that showcases how students were able to put into practice these sustainability components. Because when students talked about the course at the end, that was one of the big highlights they talked about, but they were able to tie that into water quality and ecological literacy and sense of place.
So very definitely, my idea was to develop a sociological imagination, which is the concept of connecting the personal with the moment in history and the place and time. And so it fits with a sense of place, but then also takes that idea of place and expands it. So not just your place in the local community or your place in this particular woods, but what is your place in the social structure? What's your place in society? So, and then to think about experiences then always with that context. And so recognize some experiences are it's really a privilege to be able to go walk in the woods. And so just raising that kind of awareness, and that's part of the sociological imagination, to understand that my experience, isn't necessarily everybody's experience, and understand how my experience might differ than other people's experience. I think most of the class was already pretty socially aware, but they also wrote about, a number of times in their journal entries, I read, I hadn't really thought about it this way before, or I didn't really, I didn't know that about places in the country that don't have potable water. We're focusing on like Jackson, Mississippi and Flint, Michigan, but there are places all the time that don't have access to potable water. And so we talk about that in the context of talking about water treatment and doing our field trip and such.
Another part of that, I would say, that's the whole idea of autoethnography. We didn't really use that terminology in the class, but it's something that Maggie and I are both at least somewhat familiar with, and being able to use our own perspective and our own lens. But so that's the auto part of ethnography, and then the ethno part is our culture, and then kind of writing about that or speaking about it, and enabling our students to do that. I think, and they did that in a very strong and compelling way. And I would also say, sense, not only sense of place, but sense of self and sense of community. Those are other components that also tie into a lot of the work that I do from an academic perspective.
And connect with the sociological imagination.
Yes.
Very well. Yep.
Yeah.
As a final question, I'd love for each of you to reflect on, what would you like listeners to know? And I think there are two ways of answering this. One is for fellow instructors at the university or at other universities, what would you encourage them to know or try with this sort of team teaching approach? So that's sort of part one. And then part two, are there any things that, you would like to say to students who may be listening about kind of ways to engage with a more robust and integrated sense of place and the sociological imagination?
I think the takeaways for me, one of them from this experience is I think that faculty and students, we should be pressing for more interdisciplinary experiences and pressing for more opportunities to either teach a team taught class or take a team taught class. Like, we need to change the structure in some way to make this more possible. And so many thanks to the Institute for Culture
Agreed.
Studies for making this possible. So I think it takes a commitment to learning, and it takes a huge time commitment, but it's also very worth the effort.
I think in terms of what to tell the student, what I'd like to tell students is that with sustainability and with most aspects, especially in the humanities, there's a lot of unknowns, and that's sort of inherent to the day-to-day experience of trying to get to know sustainability better and to pursue those unknowns and to take risks in doing that, and don't hesitate to take risks. And by taking risks, I would say, connecting to what Maggie just said, it may take classes that are not right within your comfort zone, because that kind of pushes those boundaries. And then also for students to reach out to, I would say, other professionals that are doing the work that they're doing, that they're wanting to do, and think about ways that it can become the vision that a student has about what they want to do when they graduate. To think about how they can actualize that. It could be an internship, or it could be, maybe just a shadowing someone for a little while. But by doing that, I think it will help students to really reimagine what is in store for their future, and ways that they can take new paths. And related to that, it was interesting. I read that this fact here, that this comes from the Institute for the Future. 85% of the jobs that exist in 2030 have not even been invented yet. And I think that's a very key point to think about with our students and other faculty, is that we don't know what the future holds. 2030 is not that far from now. And I think what the study indicates, but the idea is that there's so much that we are not aware of right now that will be happening. And I'd say for students and faculty is, how do we set up our students for success in this future that is very unknown? And I think that's sort of the kind of a beautiful part of exploring sustainability, but also a challenging part.
Thank you so much for joining me today, Nathan and Margaret. If you are interested in learning more about the ICS Team Teaching Program, go to bgsu.edu/ICS, and you can learn more about the program. If you're interested in following us on social media, we are on Twitter and Instagram at ICS-BGSU, and we also have a Facebook page. You can listen to Big Ideas wherever you find your favorite podcasts. We would be grateful if you would subscribe or follow us and rate us on your preferred platform. Our sound engineers for this episode were Marco Mendoza and Deanna McKeegan. Research was provided by Sophia Mikulski, with editing by Joe Elia.